So we begin 174b towards the bottom, about 5 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna says if a person on his deathbed makes all his properties hektish, gives them away to the temple. The Amar and then he says, "Oh, but $100 of my estate, of my property, is actually, belongs to somebody else. Like he lent it to me, I owe him the money. So if I had, $1,000 of my property, I give it all to Hekdesh, but $100 is it belongs to someone else, right? Or it's owed to someone else, Neman. So we believe him. So that person gets the $100 and the temple gets the $900. Why? Chazaka and Adamosa Kinyan Hektish. Because we know that people don't play tricks on with Hektish. People take that very seriously. If he says that everything but that is Hektish, then we know that it's true. He's not going to try to play games with it. Maskil Rav Nachman asks the following: Now, what about if the person? You should say the same thing about his children, right? Like, what if he says, this should be the case of any estate. If a Shliv Meirah says, "I owe somebody $100," then we should believe him because he wouldn't be trying to cheat his children out of their inheritance. But however, Rav Shmuel on the Amrei, Tarvayo, both Rav and Shmuel said, "Shliv Meirah Shamarman Luchlon Biyadi." If a person on his deathbed says, "I owe someone $100." Amar Tanu Nosnin. If he said, "Give him $100," then we do so. Below Amar Tanu, but if he just says, "Oh, I owe so and so $100," and then he drops dead, then that person doesn't get a share in the estate. It all goes to the children. Now, why don't we believe him? Right? We should believe him because he's not going to try and, just like we say, he's not going to try and cheat Hektish. He's not going to try to cheat his children out of their inheritance. Alma, so we see Adam Asui Shlo Lahasbi. And we see from this that a person doesn't want to fill up his sons with possessions, with property. So Adam so we should say the same thing. A person doesn't want to make himself appear rich. I think what it's saying here is that it's either like an ayin hara, or you don't want people to relate to your children as, oh, those guys are so wealthy. You want to be modest about it. So you should say the same thing about yourself, right? That maybe we should only give the guy the $100 in the Hektish case. If the guy says, like, give him the money, but if he doesn't say give him the money, he just says, I owe him the money, then maybe we should say he's just trying to be modest about his wealth, or make people think that he doesn't have that much money. So Gemara says, oh, you know what Rav Huna was talking about? Not a general case. He's talking about where there is a contract, right? Where the guy who is purportedly owed the money has a contract. And so the sick guy says, yes, that's a valid contract. So, that's a little strange. Like, why would you even need to say that? But the Gemara is going to analyze that, Michlal. So if that's what we're talking about, then there's Rav Shmuel Delonakishtar. So what was Rav and Shmuel's statement? It must be that he has no document, no contract. So Amar Tnu Nosnu. So, but then why do we give the money if he said, give so-and-so the money, if there's no contract? And that's why they say, don't give the money, unless he says Tanu, but Milval Pehava. But even if he says give it to him, there's no contract. It's considered an oral obligation, a loan made without documentation. You can't collect. You can collect from, if the guy pays you back, he pays you back, but you can't go to the estate and you can't go to a buyer of the guy's property and say, oh, so-and-so owed me $100. Where's your proof? You have to have a contract. There's no contract. You don't pay. So what's this idea that Rav and Shmuel say, that you have to say Tanu, that you have to say give it to him in order to for the estate to pay it off.
We learn, it seems to me many times that we honor the wish of someone who's a shchiv meirah, right? If he says,
Hmm.
"I want to give this to somebody, I want to give this, I want to," don't we honor his words, right?
Yeah. Oh, so
So
you're asking about Rav and Shmuel, right?
what?
You're asking about Rav and Shmuel
Right. I mean, why are we not? He says to his, "I'm going to
because
give."
there's a difference. The difference is if he's doing if he's says give this to so and so, that's when we take him seriously, when we act on it. But if he says I owe somebody something, right? That's not a directive. It's a fine it's a kind of a fine distinction, and it is surprising that based on the general attitude, as you say, is that we're going to follow the Shlimer's instructions. What Rav and Shmuel are saying is that it has to actually be instructions, not just I don't know what you would call it, like sharing information. He doesn't have the privilege to share information that that we should believe that more than anybody else. What he does have is the privilege to do a bequest. So it's a fine distinction, perhaps, but that seems to be what the story is.
But then, okay, haven't we also learned that if someone has a chov to someone, it's passed passed down, and doesn't the creditor have the right to collect that from the children?
If there's a contract.
If there's a contract, it has to be
Yeah,
a contract.
right. And also in the case of an estate, if there's a lien, but not from the rabbis would not allow people to collect from cash accounts or movable property.
Mm,
Okay, so Ella Rav Nachman, I the idea Naki Star. No, this idea that Rav and Shmuel, we're talking about an oral obligation. That's not the case here. They're both in both Rav Huna and Rav and Shmuel statements. We're talking about there is a contract, lo kasha, but there's no contradiction between Rav Huna and Rav and Shmuel. Ha demakuyam. Rav Huna is where he says we give more power to we give the money. That's where there is a document that has been validated by the court. But Rabban Shmuel's case, where they say you don't give it to him unless he uses the language tenu, then it's a document that has not been certified by the court. Um, so Amar Tznu Kaiman Lishtari. So if he says give it to them, that's considered a Shliv Meirah saying give him the money. That's like based on this contract, that's like him validating the contract. And so it becomes a validated contract. Lo Amar Tznu, but if he didn't say give it to him, then that's not validating the contract, and they're saying you can only collect in such a case from a validated contract. Amar Rabba. Rabba has a similar statement. Shliv Meirah Shamar Mana L'Plon Biyadi, same case. If he says, I owe somebody $100, the Amru Yisomim Paranu, and then the after he dies, the estate, the orphans say, we already paid, right? Now money, we believe him. But but if the guy, the dead guy had said, give $100 to this person, the Amru Yisomim Paranu, and the orphans say we paid, and the money, we don't believe them. So Gemara says, well, what are we trying to prove here with this Rabbah statement? Klapi Laya, which way are you going? Ipchamistabra, the opposite. It seems more logical to deduce the opposite. Amar Tanumana, if he said give $100, Keva de Paskebu and Lamilsa, since their father had actually said something definitive, like an actual command, an actual instruction, Iklamema de Pare. So why wouldn't they do it? Like they would listen to their father. But if he just said, I owe him $100, since he didn't give him instructions, you go in with low party, maybe they didn't pay him. So you could look at it either way. So my answer is no, this is what Rabba really said. Or if Rabba said something about this, it must be that this is what he said. In other words, we're reinterpreting or restating what Rabba said. But Shlimer says, I owe somebody $100 and he dies. V'amar Yisomim Chazar v'amar lanu Abba Parati, and the orphans say not that we paid the guy, but our father then told us that I paid him. Right? Then we believe them that the father paid. My Tama, why? Adkuri Midkar. Because it makes sense that, while the father is saying, "Oh, I had a loan with, I borrowed money from so and so," and then while he's talking about it, it comes back to him the whole case, and like, "Oh, and I remember now that I paid it back," right? So that's kind of that seems reasonable. Um, but Tnun Mala plenty. But if he says give $100 to so and so, and then he dies, remember he's telling Chazri Rabba Parati, father had said, I said give $100 to so and so, and I remember I gave him already $100. Ain't the money, we don't believe him. Dimi Isa, the party lover over Tnun. Because if it were the case that he had already paid him, he wouldn't say give him the money, right? If it's something that he's determined to do now, right? I want to give so and so $100. Oh, wait, I gave it to him already. That doesn't stand to reason. But if you're talking about an event in the past, I borrowed last year, I borrowed $100 from somebody, and then it makes sense that a few minutes later he'll remember, oh yeah, but I paid him back, didn't I? That's reasonable. Okay. Boy Rava. Rava asked, Shlipa Rosh Hashoda, a deathbed admission that you owe somebody money. Mahu, what about that? So in other words, um, it's not that he's saying I want to pay back this loan, but someone demands, comes in to demand payment of a loan. And the guy says, "Yeah, I owe you the money." So what do we do then? Sorry, Chlomer Atamedai. Does he say does he have in order for us to pay on behalf of the estate? Does it have to be a case where he says, "Yes, I owe you the money," and everybody in the room is my witness that that's the case? Oh, and sorry, or is it just enough that he says, "Yes, I owe you the money," right? And sorry, Kasovu, does he have to say to the people in the room, "Yes, I owe him the money. You're my witnesses. Write it down. Write the contract." Oh, and sorry, or does he not have to do that? In other words, what yeah, does I mean it's not clear why you would have this requirement from a Shliach but the Gemara says, what are the two sides of the argument? Adam Mashata b'shas misa. Do we say that the guy could just be joking even though he's dying? Oh, yeah, Adam Mashata b'shas mita. Or could he just be joking? Or do we say somebody who's on the verge of death is not going to be joking around, right? After he asked the question, he answered his own question. And on the Mashas B'Shas Misa, you know what? People don't joke around when they're dying. So whatever he says, we have to take seriously. So he doesn't have to say, "And you're my witnesses," and write it down in the document. Whether he independently made the statement, "I owe someone money," or if he admitted responsibility to a claim, we still believe him as a Shlit Merah. Okay, next
But
Mishnah.
but we said above that unless there's a document, the Yorshim, the Yitomi, they don't have to pay it back, right? So what
Yeah,
difference
now
does
we're
it
not
make?
talking about Yarshim
I
and well,
understand,
I mean,
but
we are talking about Yarshim, but we're not talking about a claim that it was already paid. So I'm sorry, what's your
no,
question?
so then what difference does it make what he says? If he's Shchiv Meirah and he dies, then if there's no document, the heirs don't have to pay him back. He's jesting, not jesting, making a joke. What difference does it make what he says?
Right. So okay. So Rava is asking or proposing, perhaps, that that's fine for when the Shechivei makes an independent statement. He looks up and he says, "You know what? I owe somebody $100 or pay somebody $100," right? But if somebody in the room says, "Wait a minute, before you die, what about the $100 you owe me?" And he says, "Yes, yes, I owe you the $100," and then he dies. So does that have the same power as him? Does that have the Shechivei power of saying independently, "I owe you $100"? That's what he's asking. And he's proposing that maybe it needs more backing. Like maybe he has to be more definitive and say, and everybody's a witness to that, and so on. But then he ends up saying, no, that's not the case. It's just the same. In other words, he's saying what you're saying. It's the same, right? He's inquiring, would there be a difference here? And he ends up saying, no, it's the same whether I say I owe you $100 or whether he's saying, yes, I admit I owe you $100. It's the same rule. There's Shliach.
So then,
So, you're correct, in other words, but Rava was just kind of testing the boundaries.
oh, so in the end, unless he takes the money out of his pocket right then and gives it to
Yeah.
the man, this this
Yeah,
claim,
if
it's
there's
not going to get
witnesses that he gave
anything.
it, sure. Sure, if there's witnesses that he paid it back, then of course that would be a different story.
No, but unless I'm saying at that moment, he says, "Yeah, I agree that I owe you the money. Here's the $100." He takes it out of his pocket right then. If he doesn't do that, this claimant's not going to get anything in 2 days or a week or whatever it is if the person dies.
No, I think it's the other way around. I think the point is that if he says, yes, I owe you $100, and then he dies, then it's like he said on his deathbed, give this guy $100.
Uh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know because we were making the distinction between give and I owe, and if
Hmm.
before, and if he says I owe, then he's not obligated because he's not. He's at the
Right.
command versus if he says give, then he's then.
Okay, so the middle case is what if you go to the deathbed, you go to the hospital room, the hospice, and the is about to die, and you say, just remember that, like, let everybody know, don't you owe me $100? And the sick guy says, yes, yes, I owe you $100. So that's kind of in between where he says, give this guy $100, or saying, I owe the guy $100. The middle case, kind of the boundary case, is I admit when you claim I owe you $100. And the answer is it's the same, right? It's like saying, give it to him.
Oh, you're saying it's like I could say it's like I owe you, and then he would not give it to him, or
Right.
he would not be obligated to.
And Bravo is saying it's like I said, it's as if I said, give it to him, give it to you.
Uh, I hear you. Was that clearly in the text?
I think so, yeah. Because the question is, am I just fooling around when I say yes, I owe you the money? And Rava says, no, people don't do that on you. They don't fool around on their deathbed. And therefore we like we take his statement seriously, even if he doesn't give it the additional gravity of saying, and I want you to write it down and you're my witnesses and so on. Because we don't usually require that of a Shli Meirah, right? And so in the case where we think he might be joking, I mean, why don't we ask that all the time, right? Um,
I just don't think the Gemara clearly says that. It's almost to me, it's almost like a teku. I don't know that it clearly says that he gives that this person is going to be able to collect the money.
hmm.
This man
Well,
doesn't
it
take it.
doesn't state so outright, but I think from the discussion, it's clear that that's what he means. The question is, in such a case, do you have to have the additional certification of the deceased of the dying person saying, and everyone here is my witness to this, and write it in a contract. And Rava says, no, you don't have to do that, implying that we believe him even if he doesn't do that, or we act on his admission even though he doesn't add these extra uh, things to assure us that he's being on the level. No, he doesn't have to convince us that he's being on the level. Um, he We take his this admission as seriously as any other Shliv Meirah statement.
So it's as if though. So then we're taking it's sort of a fine line here, but then maybe
Yeah, yeah.
we're
Ex-
taking the taking the position. It's as if it was written down. And in that case, he would be beholden to he or his heirs would be
yeah,
beholden to pay the contract back.
you could view it that way, yeah.
Uh-huh. So that's even a fine line within the middle position.
Okay, next Mishnah. Amav v'chaveru b'shtar. If you lend money with a contract, go min chasim mishubanim, you can collect even from properties under lien. In other words, from properties that the borrower subsequently sold to somebody else, you can collect from those. All you ate him, but if there's no contract, but it's only with witnesses, then you can collect from property that the guy still owns, but not from properties that he sold, because how are the buyers supposed to know that that there was a loan? Hotiel of Ksav Yodo Shuchaylo, if the lender um, uh, brings out a document, so not a contract with witnesses, but an IOU written in the borrower's own handwriting, and we can kind of recognize the handwriting. Same thing. It's not a valid contract, even though there's this additional thing that yes, I have an IOU, but that doesn't help you. Doesn't help you. You can't collect from properties that had been sold after the loan. So you have a contract, a loan contract, and then a guarantor, an RAV signs or is written in after the signatures, right? So it says, borrowed $100 from you. Witnesses sign here, and then we write in, and and Ken guarantees the loan. So then Govim and you can again only collect that. That doesn't count as a from now when it comes to collecting from the RAV, collecting from Ken. So again, it's Ken's properties at the time of the loan are not subject to lien. So any property that if it comes to the point where Ken has to pay back because he's the guarantor, so any property that Ken has, I can confiscate or I can use to pay back the loan, but not properties that he has subsequently sold off to somebody else. Maase Ubali Rabbi Shmuel. There was a case of Rabbi Shmuel. The Amar Govin Chasim B'nei Charim, and that's what he said. You can collect from the properties that Ken still has. The Amar Govin Amar La Banana. So Banana said to him, "Ain't Govin La Min Chasim Mishubani V'La Min Chasim B'nei Charim." You know what? We're not going to let me collect any property from Ken, any repayment. Amar Lo Lama. Why? Amalo, he says, Hare hachonik asachad bashuk. Let's say you were choking your the guy to pay you back. You were trying to, you're basically send the mafia after me, right? You're going to break my legs in the street in order to get me to pay back. And so and somebody else comes along. You know what? Don't break his legs. I'll pay it back. Potter. Then, later on, or legally, the guy who said I'll pay, don't worry, I'll pay it back, he's not legally obligated. I mean, he might also get his legs broken, but he's not legally obligated. Why? Shelo al amunoso hilvahu. Because he's not, obviously what's going on here, he's just trying to save the guy from getting his legs broken. It's not really that he trusts, ordinarily a guarantor says, listen, I trust the borrower completely. I know he's going to pay back, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and guarantee the loan. But in the case where you're just trying to save someone to get his legs broken, clearly your motivation is that, and not because you really think that he's going to pay back. Ella, Ezu Ariv, Huchayev, what kind of guarantor is legally responsible? Halveu vani nosin lach, like I said before. Um, uh, Lend him the money. Don't worry if he doesn't pay you back, I'll pay you back. Chayav. Then the guarantor has to pony up. Sheken el munaso hilvo, because the only reason he's saying that is that I'm sure he's going to pay you back. He's completely trustworthy. V'yamar Rabbi Shmuel, harotz shiachim. Rabbi Shmuel says if you want to become wise, yasok b'dinei mamanos. Analyze this. Learn Bava Batra. Learn the Hilchos and the Zikin. She'en l'cha mitzvah b'Torah yoser mehen. There's no area of Torah study that's greater than that. Shehen k'mayan hanaveach, for like a spring that bubbles up from the ground. V'harot says sheyasok b'nidei mamanos. What does that mean? They're like a spring. It's like there's constant. I think to me it means there's always new case law coming up, right? There's always new situations coming up. So it's not like ossified law, ritual law or whatever. It's a living thing that has to deal with new situations all the time. So if you want to be wise, like be challenged by new cases and do the analysis. And what's the best thing to do if you want to study torts? Yishamish Shimon Bananas, like hang out with Shimon Bananas. Bananas, he knows the score here. He's a pretty smart guy when it comes to this stuff, and he's actually dealing with understanding what's really going on below the surface.
This other case just now seems like similar to the case of the marriage we learned yesterday. He's not really going to pay the ketubah.
Yeah,
Just wants
yeah,
the
very
woman to
good.
get married.
Right, very good point. Yeah. Okay, so Amarullah, Devar Torah, Echad Echad Milva B'Shtar ve'Echad Milva Al Peh, from the Torah law, whether it's if you owe somebody money, you borrow money, whether you borrow it with a contract or you borrow it without a contract, government you should be able to collect from land that was sold off after the loan took place. You should be able to collect from the buyer. What my tama shibuda daraisa, because I hold that the property that you own at the time that you make the loan, at the time that you borrow the money, is midaraisa. It's under lien, automatically becomes under lien. So why does the halacha require like the lien to be satisfied only from properties that you still own and not from properties you sold off? Because mishum seder de lekuchos, because it's affecting somebody else, and it's affecting, I think it's more accurately, it's affecting the marketplace. People are not going to engage in buying land if they're always afraid that, oh, maybe somebody borrowed money against this land and I'm gonna, the transaction will be canceled, the land will be taken away from me, nobody's going to do it. So why don't you say the same thing about whether there's a contract? Shouldn't people be worried? No. Hasam inhu ninhu dafsidu anafshayu. The buyers are bringing they haven't done their due diligence if they don't know that there was a loan outstanding. In other words, the buyers should know, since if the contract is documented in the contract, the Gemara always says Islay Kala, then people know about it, right? It's not something that you can cover up. People know about it, and therefore the buyers, they know perfectly well that they're buying land that's under lien, and they're taking that risk.
That's what we learned many times, that
Yeah.
the buyer has an obligation to check out whether there are liens on the property.
Right. It's a little odd that we finally get to it in the last mission in the Masechta, right?
So
But
how are we
that often
saying,
happens.
right? So then how are we, does the Mishnah seem to say, if I did this correctly, that we cannot collect from property that's already sold? I thought we were learned over and over that you can. Right?
If it's an oral loan, but if there's a contract, then you can't. Then we're not like Shliv anymore. Remember, we're
No, I
talking
understand
about,
that.
yeah.
But it didn't the mission was, oh, so was the mission only talking about oral?
Yeah, that's what the Mishnah said. Look
Okay.
back at the Mishnah, right?
Right,
If it's
okay.
an oral loan,
Okay.
then you can only collect from
Right,
property that's
okay.
not under lien. Okay. Barabba, Amar Barabba says the other way around. Dvar Torah, Echad Milu Shari, Echad Milu Alpeh, Eino Gavel Mechasim B'nei Chorin. According to Torah law, there's no such thing as an automatic lien, right? If I borrow money and then I sell my property, there's no problem with that. Like when it comes time to pay back the land, I no longer have the property. There was no lien. There was no automatic lien here. So my tama, why not? Shibud alav deraisa. The Torah doesn't have that rule. So in that case, when it comes to a loan with a contract, why did the rabbi say that you can go to the buyer and get the land back and get the land as payment? Because then nobody would lend, right? If like you're afraid that um, then the conditions of lending would be too onerous for the lender. So why do we only say that about documented loans? Also, likely call because we have to balance being fair to the buyer and encouraging loans. So that's the compromise that's made. So either way, I mean, we have the same logic, whether you say that really it's Doraisa, there is such a thing, or there isn't such a thing, but either way it comes out the same. But no, did Rabba really says that there's that there's no biblical obligation um, for for a lien? Like there's no biblical rule that there's an automatic lien. V'hamar Rabba, but Rabba said, "Gavu karka yeshlo." If the estate collects land as payment for the loan, then you have the rule of the Bechor getting double. But if they get cash back, then he doesn't have the double portion. That's like found money. or money that not found money, but money that comes into the estate's possession after the death of the father. So the Bechor is not entitled to the extra portion. But land, he was entitled. So it seems to me that it would make sense to say that that's because really, the land, like the was securing the dead father's interest. It's like it was like part of the estate already, and therefore the Bechor would get double. Um, so my answer is v'chitema, and if you want to answer epuch the Rabba l'ula l'dula Rabba, maybe we got the versions backward. Maybe it's Rabba that says that it's biblical. The lien is biblical, and Ula says it's not. But no, Amar Ula. But we have another statement of Ula that says that he's the one that says it's biblical. Dvar tar balchov dine biziburis. That what kind of land? Let's say there's a choice of what kind of land to confiscate to pay off the loan. So Ula says it's like the poorest quality land. Like you have no obligation to give better quality land. So clearly he thinks that it's a biblical thing. Ella, so how do we answer it? Rabba Tamadim Rabba Kamar. Rabba was not saying that he believes that the firstborn doesn't get the double portion. Or gets the double portion from land. He's just explaining the logic of somebody else's position. The Laylas really, he doesn't hold that. Okay, so we're satisfied that Rabbi can say that it's not that there's no biblical law of lien. Now Rabbi Shmuel Ner Tavai, what do other people say about this? Rabbi and Shmuel both say milval peh, if it's an oral loan, you can't collect from heirs or from buyers. My tama, why? She would allow deraisa because it's not a biblical thing. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish but Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish both say milval peh gova b'minei yashin b'minei kuchos. You can, for a verbal loan, you can collect from others, from the estate or from buyers. My tama, why she would deraisa because it's a deraisa thing. Meisvei, so they asked, Hachofer bor b'shus harabi. Somebody digs a pit in public property, public domain. V'nafal sharva harago, and an ox falls in and kills him. Patur, the owner of the ox is not liable for your death. She'im meis hashor, if the ox also dies, yarshe bal habor chayav mishalim demei shor livalav. Guess what? The estate of the guy who is digging the pit, not only do they have to suffer the loss of the guy who was killed by the ox, they have to pay for the ox, right? Because you dug a pit, the ox stumbled into it and died. It's your fault. So what does that have to do with us? It the dead person's chayav is required to pay for the ox. That's like, that's comparable to an oral debt. There's no contract on it, right? It's like it's a debt that we know exists without any contract, right? And still the estate has to pay it. So Amar Bila, Amar Rav, so Bila said, Bisha Amad Bedin. We're talking about where he didn't die right away. He was sued in court. He's in the hospital, but he's sued, and the court rules, yes, you owe the money, and then he dies. Oh, so then it's a pre-existing obligation, right? It's something that's certified by the court. That's why the money can be taken from the estate. But if he died right there on the spot, then we would not say that. It would be more like a non-contracted loan. Vaha harago katane, but that doesn't sound like the case here. It sounds like the ox killed him. It sounds like he died on the spot. Amar barava sha'aso trefa. Doesn't mean he killed him. It means he mortally wounded him. And he lingered, and while he was lingering, he got sued, and the court ruled that he had to pay for the ox. Amar Nachman Tanei me sukavaro. I have a version of the brisa that says that he died and was buried. In other words, was buried by the ox. So he did die right on the spot. Our answer is Hasam de Yasve Dayane Apuma de Vera. It means that yes, indeed. You know what? You know where this pit was? Right in front of the courthouse. Okay, they were all sitting around having their lunch on the steps of the courthouse. This incident happened, and the guy is like underneath the ox and he's groaning, and the court says, wow, we rule that this guy who's dying is has to pay for the ox, and then he dies. You're right there in the pit. So that's a little unlikely, I think, to put it mildly. But that's a way you can wriggle out of it. Amar Papa, Hilchasa, Papa says, what? How do we rule? Milva Peh Gova Mina Yarshim. A verbal loan can be collected from by the estate. Ve'eno Gova Mina Kuchos, but not from buyers. Uh, Government Yarshim. Why do we allow him? Why do we allow him to collect from the estate? Because they shall Delos Lovin. Because I wouldn't lend you money if I thought maybe you'll die and I'll never be able to collect. Right? As we said before, you can't collect from buyers because it's a verbal loan. If it were a documented loan, then it would be on me to find that out. But if it's a verbal loan, there's no way for me to find out, and so it's only fair to let me collect the money, and we will
Why
stop
can't he collect from the Yorshim as opposed to the buyers? I understand why we say we cannot collect because he wouldn't lend, but why does it apply to the Yorshim that he can collect? Well, why?
because if we didn't allow him to collect from Yorshim, then he wouldn't you nobody would lend any money because everybody could die. Right? I lend you money, I'm gonna say I'm not gonna lend you money. What if you die tomorrow? I won't be able to collect. Now you could say, okay, so lend with a contract, right? But apparently, Gemara feels it's in the interest of borrowers to be able to borrow money without all the fuss of having a contract. And so, the only way to ensure that there's a market in verbal loans is to say, listen, don't worry, if I die, you can still collect from the estate.
So why wouldn't the same rule apply to the Chochot that he could collect?
Because it's not fair to Lukuho, right? They're a third party. They're not party to the transaction. I want to lend you money. You want to borrow money from me. I need assurances that if you die, I'll still get paid back. That's one thing. But when it comes to a third party going to the borrower and say, "Hey, I'd like to buy your building," right? Then they have no knowledge of the loan. They need protection, right? They shouldn't be. They shouldn't like then all transactions would always be subject to reversal because it might turn out later that there was a loan against this. Now, if it's a contracted loan, then then we assume that everybody knows about it. So if I go ahead and buy the land, I know what I'm doing, right? I'm taking on the risk. But if there's no way for me to know that there's a loan or that there's a lien outstanding against this land, then nobody would ever buy anything. You wouldn't have any market in selling property because everything would always be possibly under lien, right? It's the transparency that's needed here. You need in order to have an orderly market, you need some transparency. So a verbal loan doesn't have transparency, but a written loan, a contracted loan does.
Yeah, I can understand that, but then why? So it doesn't apply the same way to the Yorshim because the Yorshim are part of the family, basically, right? They should know about this.
No, Yarshim, listen, how do you inherit? It's not like you engage in a transaction. I'm going to inherit. No, inheritance is something that happens beyond anybody's control, right? There, the question is, it's not like nobody's ever going to inherit if there's a risk. Of course they will, right? That some people are going to die and they're going to leave estates, right? And they're automatically going to go to the Yarshim, right? But so the Yarshim, it's not like they need protection, right? Um, but the issue there is, since everybody is going to die, no one will ever lend money because if I lend you money, fine, I trust you're going to pay me back. But what if you die? Then I'm never going to get the money back. So therefore, we say in the case of Yerusha, I can collect from the estate.
We did say learned earlier that I think that they cannot collect from Yatomim, right? Isn't that, didn't we learn that
That was with the case of a Shrimera,
right?
right? And also the rules are different if the Yasomim are minors.
Right. So
Yeah, but the general case of Yerusha is not necessarily minors. Yes, we do make exceptions for minors. That is correct.
And okay, it's
I
only
know it's all
okay.
there's a lot
It's
of
only
ifs,
minors.
ands, and buts.
And there were situations where we said that you cannot collect from Yatomim, right? Or does that only apply to minors?
Yeah, usually when you say Yisomim, well, not usually. Sometimes it means minors, and sometimes it means just the general estate.
Right.
But usually, yeah, those are called Yarshim, right? Usually, if it's Yarshim, we're talking about adults. If it's Yisomim, we're talking about minors. I think that's the general that's generally the case.
So there were discussions that they
Yeah,
could,
Yisomim, right. So Yisomim have special rules. No
right.
question.
So
Yeah,
they could not collect for them. And I
right.
think we learned recently, a few days ago,
Hmm.
that the that they are still obligated once they become adults. Then they assume
Yes, that's right. That's right.
the obligation
Right.
to pay back the loan.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
tomorrow is the last day of Batra, if I'm not mistaken.
It's the last day.
David will finish it off. So congratulations to everyone who stuck out this Masachet with the most pages and most days of Daf Yomi.
See.
Have a good day, everybody.
Okay.
See you next week in Sanhedrin.
Okay. Very good.